Welcome to this Baptist News Global webinar. Here's your host, Mark Wingfield.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Mark Wingfield, Executive Director and Publisher of Baptist News Global. And it is my privilege to introduce to you today two experts on a topic that is really on all our minds right now, and that's trying to understand not only what's going on in Ukraine, but also in Eastern Europe in the larger context for all of this. So we have Wade Kusack and Knox Thames with us. I forgot. Thames is the correct pronunciation, right? Or is it?
We go Thames.
Thames. Yeah. Sorry, suddenly I lost my mind in the middle of this. We've talked many times before. So Knox and Wade are with us, and in the course of the conversation, you'll learn more about their backgrounds. But I'll just say right now, they both are experts in international religious freedom and are working in that area and have a special. I'm not going to say special knowledge, but more knowledge than most of the rest of us have, and firsthand experience as well. Many things that we want to know about this, and for those of you who are joining us either on Facebook Live or through Zoom, we invite you to ask questions along the way. If you're on Zoom, use the Q&A function, and I'll tee those up as it's appropriate, and we'll get those questions addressed. If you're on Facebook Live, just type in your question in the comment section, and we have someone monitoring that who will then relay those questions to me, and we'll get them going here. So let's begin perhaps with each of you maybe just giving some context for us about how you intersect these issues and why you're standing here before us or sitting here before us today. How did you get to this moment, and help us just begin to understand what it is that you're bringing to the table today. Knox, let's start with you.
Well, great to be back and have this opportunity to talk about Ukraine and the crisis stemming from the Russian invasion. I've worked in government for 20 years in a variety of different capacities, focusing on international religious freedom. Throughout my career, a lot of that time was spent looking at the former Soviet Union. And as you know, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. It became independent in 1991. And what's fascinating and what's interesting is Ukraine's trajectory on religious freedom has really been a remarkable success story as compared to many of the other former Soviet republics. So there's a lot riding on the line beyond the humanitarian crisis, the death of Ukraine's democracy. Religious freedom's on the line as well, because Russia is one of the worst places in the world, top of the list for being a persecuting government. So if the invasion succeeds, it's going to be bad news for a lot of Ukrainian believers of all faiths and none, if that unfortunate outcome happens.
Wow, there's a headline right there, and let's come back and we'll pull that thread some more. Wade, give us a quick introduction.
Yes, thank you. My name is Wade Kusack, and I was involved in promoting religious freedom since 2009 in the former Soviet Union, especially in the Asia countries. But when Russia first time invaded Ukraine in 2014, we immediately witnessed the persecution of minorities, evangelical Christians, and many other religious minorities that happened to be on occupied territories. So in 2014, I first time came to Ukraine to actually collect the information and understand what's going on, especially on the occupied territories. And since 2014, our organization actively involved in, first of all, humanitarian aids, and also we monitor a situation with religious freedom. And I can echo what Knox just said about that Ukraine was is a success story in terms of religious freedom, and one of the most successful former Soviet Union countries and on this matter.
Well, so this is a really great place to begin, I think, if we can get both of you. Let's go back and address this issue of what changes have happened, what are the successes that have happened in Ukraine that makes it, one of these shining examples that you're talking about?
I think as I've observed the status of religious freedom in Europe and the former Soviet Union, especially in Eastern Christian countries that are primarily Orthodox, generally there's one Orthodox church, that the state has a national Bulgarian Orthodox Church, Romanian Orthodox Church, and there is rarely a second. And if there is, it's usually a very antagonistic relationship. And so one of the examples of Ukraine's uniqueness and its success story in religious freedom is that it has multiple expressions of Eastern Christianity living side by side. Not everything's perfect, but they're not, the state is neutral in its treatment of them. So the majority of Ukrainian Orthodox believers are a member of an Orthodox community that is aligned with the Moscow Patriarchate of the Russian Orthodox Church. Now, in 2018, a group of Orthodox churches decided to break away to seek independence, called autocephaly in Orthodox Christendom. And the Ecumenical Patriarch in Istanbul, or once was Constantinople, approved that in 2019. And so now there are two Ukrainian Orthodox churches, one looking to the Moscow Patriarch and one looking to the Patriarch in Kyiv. In addition, there's a Greek Catholic Orthodox Church that is is Orthodox by rite and liturgy, but at some point in history broke with the Orthodox hierarchy and looks towards Rome. In addition to evangelicals, Protestants, Muslims, Jews, non-believers. And so this environment has been one where this sort of state neutrality towards religion has allowed lots of flowers to bloom, and has been an exceptional trend to what you're seeing in Central Asia, what you're seeing in nearby Belarus, and certainly what you see in Russia today.
Wow. Wade?
Yeah, evangelical church was developed even in the Soviet time. So Ukraine, former Ukrainian Republic, as the biggest evangelical population, churches in the former United States, and as a result, they were severely persecuted during Soviet time. When Ukraine obtained its independence, it's developed democratic institutions pretty fast. And of course, not without any problems on this way, but we can admit that Ukrainian democracy is real and exists, and the change of power, we can witness the change of power. Ukrainians have 6 presidents since since Soviet Union collapsed, and they developed pretty pluralistic societies, and they very, very close to transition between tolerance between different religious communities to the thoughtful and effective cooperation between. And I can witness that invasion in 2014 even catalyzed this process. We saw during the invasion to Donetsk, which is eastern Ukraine, now currently under Russian invasion, we saw the pictures when Christians and Muslims, even Muslims, pray together, not talking about different Christian denominations. They were all together, staying at the same square in the middle of Donetsk, praying for the unity and peace in Ukraine. And Muslim groups sometimes join them and they pray together. This means more than tolerance. That means a cooperation between religions for the sake of their country and democracy and the society they want to build.
Wow, that's amazing, because we would be hard pressed a lot of times to have that happen in the United States, as you know. I want to chase a brief rabbit on the way to a related question. It's I know we're going down a little side street for just a minute, but I hear people wanting to understand this. What is Vladimir Putin's relationship to the Russian Orthodox Church?
Wade, why don't you go first?
Well, it's a very, how can I say, it's not easy question and there is not, I don't think there is any expert who would just answer this question with all the
right.
details. I can say that Vladimir Putin has his own understanding of orthodoxy, and he's trying to push his vision on all the Slavic countries. It's not just orthodoxy. It's mixed with nationalism, Slavic nationalism. Mm. Some sort of orthodoxy included. He sees himself as a person who would unite Slavic governments, Slavic lands in the world. He would just head them as an emperor. Or, I mean, you can see this report through the multiple media outlets, his relationship with the Orthodox Church, his desires, his ideas, but they are so far from reality. They're so far. And I don't really know how to evaluate or discuss his world that he created for himself. And he lives in this world now, and basically him and maybe a few more people around him. And it's not connected to the reality at all.
I would just add that, you know, as he's tried to rebuild Russia as a major power, rebuilding the Russian Orthodox Church from its, you know, horrible repression and during the Soviet period has been part of his nation building project. I think the church welcomed that, and in the process has become co-opted, has lost its independence. We've seen very similar statements coming from Putin and Patriarch Kirill about, you know, is Ukraine a nation? Does it have its own identity, its own distinct form of orthodoxy? So it seems that the church is reading from Putin's song sheet, and he's using it as a way, like Wade was saying, completely agree, to promote this idea of sort of Russian nationalism while carrying the flag of Orthodox Christianity forward in this new Russia he's trying to build.
This is a fascinating thing, and for those like me who are old enough to have grown up during the heart of the Cold War, and we American Christians were taught to think of Russia as, you know, godless communism. That's a direct quote from my childhood, you know. And we know that's not the current situation, right? But there's also this co-opting of the church into political means, which is also not unique to Russia, as we Americans also know, right? Am I reading the situation right on that?
Yeah, I think so. And you know, one of the things I saw that was interesting was 170 Russian Orthodox priests have written a letter to Patriarch Kirill demanding that he take a different view on the conflict, that he's saying that they said, like, there is an eternal question at stake here and you've gotten it wrong, which is really shocking because it's otherwise a very hierarchical church. And it, yeah, I mean, the politics and religion have been married together since the very beginning of time. And savvy politicians, savvy dictators know that to try to win the allegiance of a population, or at least get them to go along with his authoritarianism, having it blessed by the religious leaders, Muslim, Christian, Hindu, whatever, can get them some extra mileage and a few more years in power.
And this process of engaging Orthodox Church and creating sort of a new ideology for the Russian space, for the Russia, became not after Soviet Union collapsed. I think the roots goes back to 1943 when Stalin eased his pressure on Orthodox Church and allowed to Orthodox Church exist at a certain level under heavy government control with absolute manipulation of the priests. So, and it goes with the time. And when Putin came to power, I believe Russian government decided at some point to create new ideology that would replace communist ideology for Russian people and would be under the government control. So they're trying to use Orthodox Church as an opportunity to manipulate people and insert a certain understanding and vision in their minds of themselves and of the country.
Well, now that I've gone down this cul-de-sac, I got to visit one more house on this cul-de-sac before we come back out. I hear some people today, or read some people who are drawing, you know, even a casual comparison to the state of Christianity in particular, beginning with Constantine, when you have essentially the state co-opting the church for political means, and you have an official church, right? And I know we can't roll back the clock to there, but it does seem there's some validity when you look at the big picture of state-sponsored faith, that there are some connections there. Is that far afield, or do you see that?
Yeah, I think, I was just doing some research for a book I'm writing about the letter from the Danbury Baptists in Connecticut to Thomas Jefferson. And, they, in Connecticut, there was an established church. It wasn't the Baptists. They were discriminated against. And that's when Thomas Jefferson wrote them back and talked about there needs to be a wall between church and state, not to prevent one or the other from existing, but to have them grow in their own separate gardens and mutually benefiting each other. When you see these systems where there's a state religion and you have to believe this or you get in trouble, that's where the abuse comes. That's when the human rights violations comes. I mean, you've got like the United Kingdom, it's got an established church, but there's every faith and none there.
Right.
So it can coexist in a way that respects religious freedom. But in what we're seeing in Russia today, it's the Russian Orthodox Church. A few other, preferences for other belief systems are acknowledged. But if you start asking questions, if you start doing what John Paul did in Poland during the Cold War, rabble rousing, as they would see it, there's going to be a world of hurt coming down on you really quick.
I agree, and I think. Of course, we already heard some examples of church and state come together, but there are different. There should be different motivation, and when it's just a pure ideology that included into the state understanding, it's easier to reform that, as we see in England, in example with England, right? So it's a one church, but it has been reformed. And now you have complete freedom in the United Kingdom. But in Russia, we have a corruption on every level, which also infiltrated Orthodox, church. I mean, Moscow Patriarchy. And when the money involved and when the corruption on such a scale involved, it's very, very hard to reform a current situation when a church and a government comes together.
Well, that's a profound statement for sure. Wow. I want to pull back out to a bit wider perspective now that we'll get out of this cul-de-sac I took us down on our little journey. Would you set the scene of how this current moment fits into the larger region of Eastern Europe in particular, or go broader than that if you want, but in particular, what are the connections and what is the regional history that maybe shapes this as well?
I think with Putin's narrative justifying the invasion, he talks about NATO expansion. He talks about the encroachment of the West into his sphere of influence. In his big speech, this very long, rambling speech on February 21st, he also talked about needing to protect the spiritual space of Orthodoxy. And this is where you get back to the origin story of Russia. It starts in Kievan Rus in the 10th century when it converted to Christianity. And from that point forward, the faith spread into that region of Europe and Eurasia. And then later, this little trading village called Moscow started to grow and prosper, and Russia emerged from that point. But in his retelling of it, it's sort of the reverse. It's Kievan Rus adopted Christianity. That's the font of Russian identity. And so, of course, they need to come back into the fold as an expression of Orthodox community, as an expression of Slavic nationhood, as an expression of Russian identity. And you saw that same message repeated by Patriarch Kirill of the Russian Orthodox Church, the Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, this past Sunday, really, again, sort of singing off that same song sheet. Now, Ukrainian Orthodox really disagree. Of course, the independent Ukrainian Orthodox Church has had a very strong denunciation of the invasion and of this sort of spiritual encroachment. What's really interesting is the Ukrainian Orthodox Church that's aligned with Moscow, their patriarch their metropolitan has also issued a very strong statement denouncing the invasion, praying for the Ukrainian troops. And so, Putin's war aims of trying to separate Ukraine from Europe, to bring Ukraine back into Russia. And this, it's failing on the NATO side. It's failing. The Europeans are more united than ever, but it's also failing spiritually in that the different Ukrainian churches are banding together in the face of Russian aggression, not surrendering and giving it up and saying, well, let's go back home to Moscow.
And obviously, Russian invasion, if it's succeed, going to be disaster for all the religious communities, except maybe one or two. And because we saw it on example of already captured territories, like Crimea and a part of Donetsk and Lugansk regions, there are only one church allowed. Some of the religious community may be tolerated, but nothing than a little tolerance yet. And I think it's going to be a huge disaster for all the evangelicals in Ukraine if Russians will,
right,
invade the whole country.
And I would add, I think this independent Ukrainian Orthodox Church, its days are numbered if the invasion succeeds. Like that won't be countenanced. It'll be brought back into the Moscow aligned denomination.
Well, and what of the Protestant churches in the area?
Wade, I'll let you speak to that since you're in touch with some of them.
Protestant church in Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
It's very much developed, much more than in any other former Soviet Union republics. They have a huge number of church members through all the different denominations, Baptists, Pentecostals, different evangelical and Protestant communities, and they already experienced what Russian president called Russian Spring on themselves, because all the majority, almost all of them, were destroyed in occupied territories, and even some ministers were killed during 2014 in Sloviansk. Four deacons of the local Pentecostal church were murdered, tortured, and murdered by the I think the local rebels who later joined the DNR or LNR republics. So for evangelicals, again, it's the Russian invasion. It was disaster and will be. They're not going to tolerate them, definitely, and hopefully it's not going to happen. Yeah.
So this leads up to a question. I see people discussing. It's a rather crass question, but is Putin insane? I mean, did he really think this was going to succeed? And maybe it will ultimately, but at what cost? How can we understand his motivation in this?
This is a question that may not only us talking about, right? That's the question that everybody in the world trying to understand. And he became recently became very isolated. You may see his briefings behind a huge table, and everybody else sitting very, very far from him. And what he's saying is absolutely not real. It feels like he started to sincerely believe in his own lies, which will eventually lead to complete destruction. Even if evil creates a lie and completely believe in this lie, this particular lie will destroy the evil. And that's what we see now. And lie comes from the top to the lower level. Everybody lying to each other. Even during the military operation, you see the captured Russian soldiers. They say they didn't tell us where we go. They told us it's going to be military training, and we appeared in Ukraine. Lie, lie, lie. They're going to supply us with ammunition and a gas. We never get the supply. Lie. Everything is a lie, and the system based on lie will collapse.
Powerful statement.
Yeah, I
Well,
think it's a question of is he crazy like a fox or just crazy?
right.
And I think that's, he's always been imagined as this master strategist. The way he handled the Georgia invasion, the 2 Ukraine invasions, there's troops in Moldova, there's troops in Russian troops now in Azerbaijan and Armenia. But these were much smaller engagements. And, Ukraine's about the size of Texas. It's 43 million people. 100,000 Russian soldiers sounds like a lot, and it is. But if you're really trying to occupy a country that doesn't want you there, it's nowhere near enough. We've all seen these reports about tanks running out of gas and things breaking down. So clearly the planning was off. They've been surprised by the strength of the Ukrainian people. Every day, every minute on Twitter, there's some new act of heroism, right. Starting with the Snake Island guys who had a comeback we can't repeat here, but one that was incredibly memorable, to Zelensky's courage and the way he's so articulating the spirit of the Ukrainian people. And it's just inspiring, and it's giving them a strength that Putin clearly didn't anticipate.
Well, I love your comparison to the state of Texas as someone who lives in Texas, and that really resonates because we're such a large geographic area and so many people that the thought of anyone trying to come in and contain this much geography is, it doesn't make sense. Obviously, you can go for the command and control kind of things, and that's different. I want to pull out even more now, though. We've started way in and we've come out. I want to come back out a little bit more beyond just Eastern Europe, but perhaps to all of that part of the world that's not the Americas in particular. And we see, I know the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom has put out and continually putting out lots of information about religious oppression in other countries. And, we've covered a lot of what's going on in Nigeria, for example, which is a real hotspot, still a hotspot for this. And there are other places in Africa and beyond where we see this. Is there any connection when you look globally at this issue? Is there any pattern or connection that we find here, or are these just isolated incidents?
Isolated incidents in Russia, or?
What we see in Ukraine and Russia, is it connected to this larger problem?
Russia has been on a downward trajectory for religious freedom treatment domestically for some years. The Trump administration added Russia to its watch list for severe violations of religious freedom. Right. The Biden administration last year downgraded them further to a country of particular concern status, which means they're one of the top 10 worst countries in the world for religious freedom. The Russian authorities go after evangelical groups, the Jehovah's Witnesses, religious minorities like independent Muslims, with a vengeance. In fact, the European Court of Human Rights just ruled against Russia regarding their treatment of Jehovah's Witnesses this week. And so this sort of lawfare using registration requirements, using overly strict rules for operating a church or a place of worship, that's a mode of repression that is sort of Russia has perfected, and you see it spreading into Central Asia. They very much follow that sort of post-Soviet top-down, if we don't control it, we're afraid of it mentality. There are some bright spots like Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan where Wade's done a lot of work. But that control by law is certainly a trend we see in a lot of places in the former Soviet Union. So
just quickly to jump, would Myanmar, for example, fit into the same category?
Myanmar, you've got, and it's yes and no. On one hand, there are a lot of, for non-Muslim minorities in Myanmar, like different Baptists and Christians who are operating in central Myanmar, it's ruled by law. The problem is in the peripherals and where the Rohingya Muslims live in Rakhine State, it's basically a genocide that's being perpetrated by the military. And the other ethnic minority states that are often predominantly Christian, again, the military is using committing war crimes against them. So that's probably more analogous to what could happen in Ukraine, how the Burmese military is treating these minorities in the peripheral regions of Burma.
Interesting. Wade?
For the former Soviet Union space, unfortunately, former Soviet stereotypes are still alive in many countries. So, and people use this stereotype to create to understanding of other. Government creates understanding of religious minorities as it was done during the Soviet time. These religious minorities are spies from the West and unnecessary group in our society when we need to suppress them as hard as possible. It's just a common approach. And the religious group, minority religious groups, they also developed sort of a mode of defending themselves even from the Soviet Union time. And they see any government as a threat. Any government a threat, we cannot connect them, we always can we should be oppressed by them and will be oppressed by them. And it's really hard to create a dialogue. But as soon as you create dialogue, meaningful dialogue, not just a formal interaction between government and religious communities, but dialogue between people, families, when they learn more about each other, when they learn more about the different beliefs and why people believe on a certain thing, I saw many times as these stereotypes start to fall and people discover absolutely a new reality for themselves. I was presented at one point where Muslims in Central Asia country, imams and pastors came together. First time to just create the relationships, not to discuss theologies. And this event was not aimed to reconcile the theologists, and not at all. And at the beginning of the event, and everybody knew that nobody would push them to agree theologically. And it's fine to disagree theologically, but what about behind that? Can we be friends? Can we just learn about each other? And I remember one of the imams stood up and he said, I first time see Baptists laughing. I thought they're very mad and angry people. And everybody was laughing. And it was his stereotypes. Why? Because he met maybe a few times a Baptist pastor during some conflict or some tough situation in the government when they're trying to, survive or explain what happened to the community. And they, of course, probably were emotional. And I was just amazed that Baptists can laugh. Wow. That's what breaks stereotypes. That's what's supposed to be on a large scale through the many countries, when people can learn each other without sacrificing their beliefs. And one more interesting thing. I went to one of the Baptist church in Central Asia, and I saw a huge map on the wall, and it's a Muslim majority country, and it was a big sign, Bible in every single home in our country. And they told us they used to host different religious communities there in this room. And I asked Pastor, how you can host Muslims and other religions in this room with this map on the wall? And he said, and we are sure Muslims, we not preach gospel to Muslims. We preach gospel to sinners. And and I said, that's it? It's satisfied? Yeah, it's satisfied. and they have no problem to have a T next to the map with a Bible to every single home. So they developed such approach and mechanisms to engage each other without sacrificing the beliefs and, which is very important, without sacrificing Great Commission.
Well, there's a lot of gospel in that story. Yeah, that's really outstanding. Okay, the other big player that we don't hear mentioned a lot in this story is China. And of course, Americans today are obsessed with China, and American evangelicals are obsessed, especially with China and all this. How does China relate to any of this, or does it?
Yeah, China is its own massive island of repression. It's what it's perfected is unlike anything we've seen outside of a George Orwell novel. The level of control and monitoring is unprecedented. They took the investments in resources and technology that the West freely gave them, so we would benefit from cheaper goods, and they have invented this incredibly invasive surveillance state. So for the Christian community, the Catholics have problems with the Pope tried to work out a deal where they would still be able to appoint bishops, but the Communist Party would approve it. That seems to be breaking down. There's a different part of the Catholic Church that says, no way, we want any part of this. You've got the underground Protestant church, evangelical church. You've got the state-sanctioned Chinese Protestant church. But with Chairman Xi, his sort of cult of personality is pushing all of this down. And now his picture is required in Protestant sanctuaries. And then outside of that, there's been the ongoing sort of destruction of Tibetan culture, Tibetan Buddhist culture since the 60s. And then now in the last 5 years, what both the Trump administration and Biden administration have said is a genocide against Uyghur Muslims in the far western region called Xinjiang, which is right up against these Central Asian states that Wade was referencing. And there it's re-education camps, it's forced sterilizations, forced abortions, disappearances. I was just talking with this young Uyghur Muslim woman who has asylum here in the United States. Her father had gotten a prestigious teaching fellowship at University of Indiana, and he was arrested before he got on the plane, and she's never seen him again. It's been 5 years. So what China's doing is just off the charts in the repression of free religious activity. Russia doesn't have the wherewithal or the resources to do it. So I don't think we'd see that type of surveillance state in Ukraine. I don't think they can pull it off. But this is where the Russians are much more comfortable using indiscriminate violence against everyone and just bulldozing and there was an alert that a Catholic church in Kyiv sent out saying they understand that there's this beautiful Catholic church has been targeted for an air raid. So that's the kind of mentality he's going to bring to conflict in Ukraine. So I don't think there's a lot of connection, although they do have this soft alliance to sort of leave each other alone. But even in the UN, the recent resolutions, China abstained from the Security Council resolution, which was a big deal. They didn't veto it. And then for the General Assembly resolution, which had 164 countries vote against Russia, China didn't side with Russia. Only 5 did, like Eritrea, North Korea, the real outliers of the world. So it's going to be interesting to see how those 2 countries continue to interact, and if daylight ever comes between them.
Yeah.
But one last thing, I think the fate of Taiwan really hangs on how the world responds to Ukraine. So that's a whole nother story there.
Okay, maybe we'll come back to that for time. Wade?
I can tell you about the influence of China that you can feel in Central Asia, because one of the arguments of the good things that coming from religious freedom is economic growth. And there are a lot of researches that religious freedom provide conditions for the economic growth. And if you're trying to argue this in the Central Asia, they probably will tell you, take a look at China. They have no religious freedom, but tremendous economic growth. So how can you justify that? So China, in other words, trying to impose their model of religious affairs. I cannot say religious freedom. There is no freedom at all. Religious affairs on the whole region and export it. And it's challenging, definitely.
Wow, lot to take in there. Lot to take in there for sure. To go back just briefly to this issue of Taiwan, Knox, would you say more about how this is a test?
So, Taiwan is this, it's this sort of interesting statelet. It's not a recognized country by any nations in the world. The Communist Party says it's a renegade state. It's ruled by the remnants of the Chinese nationalists who fought the communists after World War II. When they were defeated, they retreated to the island of Formosa. And there they built a thriving democracy, a capitalist economy. Religious freedom is in full bloom there. And it shows sort of, it's a very powerful counter narrative to what mainland China is trying to promote, that, we actually can be prosperous with a diverse political environment. We can be prosperous with different belief and philosophical systems competing peacefully for adherence. We can be rich and take care of the needs of our community through these approaches by siding with the West, not becoming antagonistic. So the Chairman Xi has made it clear returning Taiwan to the fold like he did Hong Kong is a goal. He just began an unprecedented third term as chairman of the Communist Party. So China followers are saying he's becoming a dictator that the country hasn't seen in many, many generations. So will he go invade Taiwan? And this is where the United States has this sort of ambiguous position. We don't recognize them as a country. We have diplomatic relations, but they're in a funny gray zone. Right. We have our Navy ships go over there occasionally. So China's, if Beijing thinks we will not do anything, I think they would go in. And so they're seeing, how are we responding to Russia? What are the sort of offshore penalties we can place on Vladimir Putin short of military intervention? How costly will they be? I think I've been impressed with the level of sanctions that the Biden administration has placed, that they've marshaled from Europe. These are really unprecedented. China has to be taking note of that. So that's a disincentive for them to go off on some adventure in Taiwan that could just really send global relations into a tailspin.
Very interesting. Yeah. So one of the other big issues of the day that this intersects is that we are living in one of the greatest global migrations of history, as far as we can tell. So much migration due to famine and political oppression, religious freedom, this whole list of issues that's causing people to push into other places, refugees, immigrants, all that. How does what's happening in Russia and Ukraine fit into that narrative? I mean, it seems if there's more than 1 million people reportedly having fled Ukraine already, that seems to worsen an already really bad problem.
Yeah, I would say that the international refugee system is broken. It's just been overwhelmed by the needs coming out of Afghanistan, Africa, Burma. I mean, now Ukraine, there are more people than countries can absorb or have the resources to take in. So this is where I think there's a huge need for the church and other civic actors to step forward. Nations can do a lot through working with the UN, but it's going to be, these images I've seen of sports halls and churches in Romania and Poland being opened up to let these people have a place to sleep. That's really heartwarming, but that can only last so long. And if this conflict drags out and the refugee flows continue at this rate, where are these people going to go? And I don't have an answer to that. But it's something that the world's going to have to grapple with because of these population flows. There's a lot of harm that happens when people have to pick up and flee in the middle of the night, for them individually, for their societies, their families. And it's a huge burden on the recipient countries.
Yeah, I mean, we've not even begun to process the Afghanistan refugees at this point, right. For example, right? Wade?
I think it's an opportunity for the church to show what church really is. Mm-hmm. And I remember our peacemaking seminars in Eastern Ukraine in 2015. We were bringing pastors from Russia to Ukraine next to the demarcation line for peace making seminar. where they can interact with the Ukrainian colleagues, and which was very important to serve together to the cities that were destroyed by war. And not only see the circumstances, I mean, what happened, but also be able to provide aid for particular people. And I remember during this seminar, one of the pastors, I don't remember from which side, he said, now I understand the place of a church in the conflict. And he said, I understand we are not taking any parts, but we are in the middle of conflict as a force that brings peace, reconciliation, and help to those who are suffering under the war circumstances. Of course, we as a citizens observing all what's going on now cannot be neutral to this evil that unleashed in Ukraine. And of course, I personally pray against this evil and the evil to be destroyed as soon as possible. But from the other side, I see my first task as a Christian to actually fulfill my earthly duty, to do something for these people who suffer, to bring help. And I see how many churches in Europe now, they open their doors. We have partners in Eastern Germany, and I don't remember any church that would say no. We're not going to accommodate refugees. They all want to accommodate refugees. Wherever church you come, you start to talk to them. You talk to pastor and said, yes, we're going to do it. We have this amount of places. We can do this. We can do that. Although American churches, American foundations react quickly. And this brings the Christ glory to be visible for all people, Christian, not non-Christian, atheist, wherever, what church is doing and what kind of stance church take. We are for the truth, yes, but we also for the actions. And our actions is to shine, to actually deliver the glory of God and make it visible.
Wow, that's a great sermon there for sure. This our time's nearing an end, but I want to segue from that to, I'm going to paraphrase a question that got asked. I'm going to put it in a little bit larger context. We see in the United States, some parties, some people, and by parties, I don't mean political, I mean individuals and groups. Some of these either attempting to justify Putin's actions or saying, well, it's part of God's larger plan, so we just need to sit back and let it unfold, right? And this clearly is a minority view in America, but it's also one that's present. And how are we to understand this odd alliance that sometimes crops up, where suddenly in America, where Russia and communism have been the enemy for the entirety of my lifetime, at least, right? How are we to understand this sudden, oh, well, you know, it's not as bad as it looks kind of stuff?
You know, I think I've written about this sort of sense that the challenges that we have here in the United States, you know, related to COVID church closures or the different Supreme Court decisions, you know, the church is experiencing persecution. And I've really tried to explain to my fellow Christians that, yeah, the United States isn't perfect, but if you're going to use the word persecution, you really need to use it in a different context, because persecution is violent, it's aggressive, it's hateful, and there's no recourse. And so I would encourage, you know, folks here who are thinking along those lines to really study what's happening in Russia itself for religious freedom, for believers of all stripes and none, to look at the devastation that's being wrought on these cities. You know, Ukraine didn't attack anybody. They were clearly not wanting to get into this war. You know, the fact that Russia bombed the Holocaust Memorial in Kyiv, you know, I mean, it's just astounding. So I would encourage them to dig in and see what's happening on the ground to people. I had this really remarkable experience where I was at a soccer game for my kid, and one of his teammates, his parents are Ukrainian. And I asked how you're doing, and she showed me pictures she had just gotten texted from her family in Kyiv in a bomb shelter. So like this is real. It's reality. This is not microaggressions of some kind. This is life and death.
I think the church and Christians supposed to relate to any pain as it has been related to them personally. That's what scriptures tell us. In Hebrew 13, scripture said us that we have to love and serve those who are suffering the way that we would suffer ourselves. It's not them suffering, it's us. And it's always such a distancing. When we're distancing from the problem began irrelevant. It's about nations, it's about geopolitics, it's about country. As soon as we started to relate to the particular people with their pain and what they experienced, we would be able to project it on themselves. What it would happen with your house, with your kids, with your parents, with those who you love? Would you say the same? Oh, it's just a geopolitics. It's supposed to be like that. No.
Right.
No, you're gonna be acting differently, and God telling us you're supposed to take anyone's pain personally. It's not against them. There is no them in His vocabulary. There is us and pain. The church. I mean, if you feel the pain of the church, you're a member of this church, right? If you don't feel the pain of the church, are you the member of this church at all? I mean, the global body of Christ. That's the question we need to think about.
Wow, yeah, that is a great application. So as we close, I want to give you each an opportunity to address anything that maybe I've not asked about or we've not talked about that you think is relevant to this. Just anything that's dangling out there that we ought to know, maybe, or that's burning in your mind to say.
Just a final word that my friend at the soccer field, she just said, please pray for Ukraine. And when you're talking about heads of states and armies, it feels pretty disempowering, but we know that prayer is important. And with that, though, I would also encourage viewers and listeners, if you think the United States needs to be doing more, to let your congressman know, to let President Biden know. And I'm pleased with the action taken so far, but this is the first week and it's going to be a long road. And so we need to encourage those in leadership, both with prayer, but also with our voices, that the United States needs to continue to lead, needs to continue to be out there helping the suffering and helping the Ukrainians defend themselves.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, I agree. And I would also add one more prayer point. Somehow God allowed this evil, to unleash its power. It happened, and it happened before in history. We know that, and we also know how it ended in the history. So I would pray that these evil days will be shortened, and more families will be reunited.
Wow. Thank you both. Thank you. This is both incredibly helpful and inspiring and educational. I just am overwhelmed by the amount of content that we've covered during this hour, and I'm exceptionally thankful to you for this. Comments coming in from those who are watching as well. Powerful presentation. Jesus wept. Very true. Thanks to you. And for those who are watching, we'll be posting this online on our social media and our website this evening, and hope that you would continue to share it with others along the way. Wade and Knox, thanks again to both of you, and we'll sign off now and say goodbye to everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Support independent faith-based journalism. Baptist News Global.